Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast Hockey. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Montreal Canadiens and previewing their season. My name's Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick.
Let's run it.
Some of the key offseason additions for the Montreal Canadiens was Alex Newhook, Casey DeSmith, and Gustav Lindstrom. They also acquired 50% of Jeff Petry's salary, which is a nifty bit of cap work by GM Kent Hughes.
On the subtractions front, Jonathan Drouin, Denis Gurianov, Mike Hoffman, Chris Tierney, among others, have now left the team for other areas. Specifically, Jonathan Drouin has now made his way to Colorado, and Denis Gurianov has made his way to Nashville. All these players were on the roster previously, so it'll be interesting to see how the construction comes up next season for the Canadiens.
Moving on to the biggest arrivals to this Montreal Canadiens team, we're going to start with Alex Newhook, who is a bit of a reclamation project by GM Kent Hughes, kind of in the ilk of Kirby Dach of last season. He was a super high draft picked 16th overall in 2019, and he's going to be looking for more opportunity coming from the crowded Colorado forward core, to Montreal, where he should get a lot more opportunity and should hopefully have the opportunity to put up some more points and live up to that high draft pick.
Casey DeSmith kind of lost favor with the Pittsburgh Penguin fan base after a poor performance last season, posting a 905 save percentage and a 3.17 goals against. He was part of that massive Erik Karlsson deal, which sees him sent to Montreal. So hopefully he can regain some form because he's had some solid previous seasons, but he just seemed to have lost his edge in recent years.
And the third big arrival for the Canadiens is Gustav Lindstrom. This is sort of an under-the-radar guy in Detroit. He was more so a bottom-pair defenseman for them, and this is a right-shot guy coming out of Sweden, a high draft pick, a second-rounder by Detroit a few years ago, and this is someone that I could look to see find his game and really decide to take charge this year, as he's sort of been banished to Montreal at this point.
Moving on from the big arrivals to the future outlook for this Canadiens team, one of the deeper prospect pools in the NHL probably at this point. It starts with their 5th overall pick from last season and David Reinbacher, as well as another stud defenseman in Lane Hutson. You got Sean Farrell, Owen Beck, and Joshua Raw there, who has starred for the World Junior team a couple times in the past here. And even missing from this list are some stud prospects in Logan Mailloux and Philip Machar, who are looking to progress as well this season.
The Canadiens still have a plethora of picks through the next 3 years. They have all their first round picks through 2024 and 2026. And they're looking to make some big splashes here with these picks and land some top-notch prospects to add to their already stacked core.
Yeah, and I can see those sevenths being gone probably as part of trade capital. I'd assume in the future, if they're going to retain salary and help out other teams, maybe what puts it over the top will be one of those seventh rounders in the future. Now moving on to their prospect spotlight. Our 3 prospects today are David Reinbacher, Lane Hutson, and Joshua Raw. First, with David Reinbacher, this is a stud defenseman out of Switzerland in the National League. He put up some pretty crazy numbers for a defenseman in that league at his age of 18. He put up 22 points in 46 games on a men's team. And this is a guy that Montreal fans were curious about and questioning the pick when it happened. They were thinking, why don't we take Matvei Michkov, among other players, at that spot? But I truly believe in David Reinbacher's potential as an NHL defenseman. You think of players like Erik Karlsson with a similar build as a sort of right shot, skilled, puck moves first before his feet, but he's also pretty agile kind of defender. This guy's an offensive potential for the NHL is pretty high, and I can see him being a great piece to Montreal's future.
You don't mind me jumping in here, Nick. He was regarded as one of the best defensemen in that draft, so that maybe was one of the reasons he went so high. There's not many other defensemen that have like such caliber in that draft.
Yeah, absolutely. At that place in the draft at 5th overall, if they wanted a defenseman, it was going to have to be Reinbacher. That was the best option available for sure. Now, later in the 2022 draft, the Montreal Canadiens drafted Lane Hutson And this is a guy that analytics people on Twitter were furious about how he went so late in the draft. Pretty much the only reason why we think he went so late is because of the height. As you can see, 5'10" for a defenseman. Apparently, this is still not a grab for NHL GMs at this point. He has put up immense points in his NCAA career so far, as you can see, way over a point per game. And this is at such a young age, 18 and 19 years old. This guy's playing in college already, and he's putting up crazy numbers with Boston. As you can see, this guy is going to be a great NHL player in the future, and I could see him and Reinbacher shaping up the back end pretty well for the Canadiens during this rebuild. The third player of focus is Joshua Roy. Canadian hockey fans probably know this guy from the World Junior success that he had playing alongside players like Connor Bedard and Logan Stankoven. This is a guy that has played in the QMJHL for most of his life. He has performed exceptionally well, despite the QMJHL's reputation of being such a weaker league compared to leagues like the OHL and the WHL. The QMJHL still boasts a lot of great talent, and Joshua Roy proved that by putting up 99 points in only 55 games. As you can see, he was drafted number 150 in the 5th round 3 years ago. This is pretty surprising, but at the time, he was not producing the same rate as he was today, and COVID put a wrench in a lot of GM's ideas of what a good prospect would be at such young ages. So now, therefore, after a bunch of years of playing, this guy has pretty much proven his worth as a solid NHL prospect, one of the top 5 in the Montreal system, and I could see him playing top 6 minutes in the future for the Canadiens.
Moving on from the prospects to the projected lineup for the Montreal Canadiens, it all starts with that first line there with Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki, really the two pillars on offense for the future for this team. And then you have Kirby Dach riding shotgun there as well. So that's a really skilled, exciting line that I think Montreal Canadiens fans are going to enjoy watching for years to come. On the second line, I've seen Juraj Slafkovsky up and down the Montreal Canadiens lineup. I've even seen him placed as low as the 4th line. I think that's just kind of crazy. I think with the guy they took first overall, they're going to try to give him every opportunity to succeed. And I think putting him on a line with Alex Newhook and Josh Anderson, that's kind of 3 guys who are trying to prove everybody in the NHL wrong this season. So hopefully they can do it together. The third line there with Sean Monahan, Christian Dvorak, and Brendan Gallagher is quite honestly a pretty solid third line as far as third lines go. And once again, Dvorak's another player who's looking to reclaim his value. Same thing with Monahan and Gallagher again. Lots of guys looking to bounce back on this team. And then on the 4th line, we have a guy that I love in Raphael Harvey-Pinard. He's one of the most fun names to say, as well as one of the most fun players to watch, because he plays with that edge, and he still has some offensive upside that they were able to tap into at the end of last season. Jake Evans is down the middle, and Jesse Jolonen, not exactly sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's probably a spot that'll be cycled through with other guys like Michael Pezzetta and Joel Armia throughout the season.
I think Habs fans are really looking for Sean Monahan to stay healthy this year. He was really solid in the games he played last year, but just unfortunately has not been able to stay in the lineup due to injury concerns.
Do we think if Brendan Gallagher didn't get injured and have his production fall, that he would be the captain instead of Nick Suzuki at this point?
Is he the longest tenured? I would assume he is. So
yeah, and he's worn the A for a while.
Yeah.
It's tough to say. I remember when Marc Bergevin re-signed him, I think he started to tear up. So definitely makes sense, but they might also want somebody who's more of a long-term solution in Suzuki, because Gallagher's a guy that is going to be a prime cap dump candidate in a couple of years. I think his cap hits $6.5 million for third liner. So as soon as this team starts to hopefully compete in some time, he might not be able to remain on the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's beloved by fans though, and that definitely was for those years, and especially to that run for the Stanley Cup Finals.
Exactly. He's the one of these out of all the guys on the roster right now. He's kind of the only guy I remember from sort of that era of Montreal Canadiens.
Mm-hmm. And Carey Price. But
and Carey Price,
is he still on the roster?
Yeah, he's unfortunately battling the knee injury still, so it's likely he'll never play again, unfortunately.
LTIR. Robida Island.
Jay Weber Island.
Speaking of Stefan Robida, another great defenseman, let's take a look at the projected defensive pairs for the Montreal Canadiens next year. As you can see, there is a youthful movement on this back end. You can see Caden Gooley starting up the left side. This is the Montreal Canadiens' best defensive prospect. He was amazing in the WHL, and he was very good in Canadian national moments as well. So he's going to be a really big piece to the defensive future of the Habs. You've also got David Savard, who is now becoming sort of a veteran on the Montreal Canadiens D-corps, surprisingly, after moving around so much between Tampa and Columbus. You've got Michael Matheson and Jonathan Kovacevic, and you also got Habs legend Arbor Xhekaj, former Kitchener Ranger, who has fought his way from being undrafted all the way to the NHL in a pretty fast motion. So it's great to see him at the starting lineup as well, alongside Jordan Harris. Among the extras, you can see our rival spotlight, Gustav Lindstrom. This is a guy I can see battling for all those bottom four spots pretty much. I feel like there might be a revolving door next year for this team. Just going to try out whoever works. Right and lefty pairs won't even matter. As you can see, we got Jordan Harris, the lefty, on the right side. But it'll be interesting to see how the season goes for the team, and based on that, who is in the lineup and who is out.
Just to add on here, I don't think this is one of the better decors in the NHL, but I think with guys like Matheson, Gooley, and Xhekaj, it might be one of the most fun to watch. And I know for me personally, Gooley and Xhekaj are two of my favorite defensemen in the entire NHL, regardless of team.
Matheson's an electric skater too. He can fly up and down the ice. Finally, we're moving on to goalies now. They have four solid NHL caliber goalies. Caden Primo may be a step behind these guys. So we have Samuel Montembeault, Jake Allen, Casey DeSmith, and then, as I mentioned, Caden Primo. Montembeault's coming off a great performance for the World Cup of Hockey. He led Team Canada to the gold. Jake Allen's been in the league. He's a veteran among these younger guys, and he's been around the league for a while. He's played in St. Louis for a number of years and has had some solid years as Montreal's starting goalie. And Casey Smith was brought in from Pittsburgh. He's hoping to bounce back after some tough years. So we'll see if any of these guys can take the starting job and run with it, or who's going to be relegated to the backup or even the third string goalie.
Yeah, and the extra Caden Primo is still surprising to me to this day, because I feel that Caden Primo had such potential and hype around him when he first came up through the ranks, and now he's still sitting as sort of like the fourth option for one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League. So I'm curious to see his progress in the AHL. I know he didn't have a great year last year on a sort of mid-level team, but I'm looking to see what he does, sort of where his confidence is at, where his motivation will be to sort of crack this roster. Maybe if they move Jake Allen or DeSmith, maybe that opens up a spot for him.
Well, that's going to lead us perfectly into our storylines for the Montreal Canadiens next season. So the first one there is, as Nick and Noel just discussed, the competition in net. So really they have four NHL caliber guys. Caden Primo might be more of a fringe, but just going over some of their stats from last year, Montembeault had a .901 save percentage and 3.42 goals against average in 40 games. So he's really starting to make a name for himself as becoming a bona fide starter or a 1A option, because Montreal was not a good team last year. So to put up those numbers is pretty impressive. And as Noel said, he was also really solid for Canada in the World Championship. Jake Allen had an 891 save percentage last year with a 3.55 goals against average in 42 games. So a little bit surprising he played more games than Montembeault, but not great numbers there, again on a poor team. DeSmith had a 905 and a 3.17 goals against average in 38 games with the Penguins. So those are pretty solid numbers, to be honest. And then Primo was limited to 3 NHL games, but he posted a 909 and 3.04 in 41 AHL games. So I think we're pretty settled on who we think is going to take the starting job. But I mean, if you're GM Kent Hughes, who do you guys look to be your backup and possibly move out?
I mean, goalie depth is never an issue. It's kind of a good problem to have. Sure, making a trade would be intriguing, but all it takes is one injury, one of these guys to go down, and then you can put in a really solid third string goalie. And a lot of teams are just riding the hot hand. We're seeing the tandem being a lot more common through NHL teams. So all it takes is just one of these guys to get on a hot streak. And I mean, with three solid goalies, it's more likely to happen than if you just had one running an AHL backup.
Yeah, and a few of these guys have even sort of tested waivers before. These are guys that no one ever really cared about, and now they're finding some strides in whichever way they have chosen. I'm worried about DeSmith because of those numbers in Pittsburgh, moving over to the Montreal decor and the Montreal system. It'd be interesting to see if he's going to get exploited and sort of overwhelmed by the shot quality that might be against him compared to what they had in Pittsburgh on defense. But someone like Samuel Montembeault, I really believe can be a starting netminder in the NHL, and I want to see him continue to grow and continue to stay competitive this year and sort of earn that starting role.
He's young too. He really fits the timeline of this Montreal team. That's another goalie actually from Florida.
Yeah.
I remember he was on Florida before this. So Florida had Devin Levi and Montembeault, which they have now sent to other teams and are still riding the $10 million man, Bobrovsky, who's getting up there in age. So I wonder if that'll come back to bite him in future years.
I just wonder if Montembeault's the guy long term for them at the starting spot. Like, I definitely think he's going to be a great tandem goalie, but you got to wonder if he's the long-term solution there. And I also definitely think that one of Jake Allen or Casey DeSmith is going to be moved out before or partway into the season. I think Casey DeSmith was under the impression that he'd never put on a Montreal Canadiens jersey. I mean, the team didn't even release any press, any PR material when he was acquired. So I think they were working on a Casey DeSmith trade immediately. And I guess we'll get into that trade more later on in the storylines, but I'd fully expect to see one of those guys gone before the season's over.
They did that same thing with PG, acquire him, then move him right away. So maybe they just haven't been able to find that deal to move to Smith. That's a good point.
Yeah.
As soon as an injury comes up, one of these guys is probably gone.
Yeah, and one thing I'd worry about in the future is if they're going to trade any of these guys to the Atlantic Division, as Noel mentioned. There have been some goalies coming out of Florida, but into teams that are in their same division, which I find risky based on the current structure of the NHL regular season, playing more games against your division rivals. Therefore, if you trade a goalie, you have to be kind of sure that he's not going to be someone else's starter that's going to win them games and steal points off of your team.
Great point. So moving on to our next storyline here, it's just really wondering if Slafkovsky is going to be able to prove the haters wrong. I mean, there's already people who are labeling him a bust, which I think is just pretty ridiculous. Like
Buskovsky.
Like he's 19 years old. Like his first season, he kind of dealt with a lot of injuries, so he was limited to 39 games. But to be blunt, he wasn't even that great in the 39 games he did play. He only put up 10 points. So, I mean, it's understandable for fans to be a little bit wary or cautious about his development, but to label him a bust this early in his career, I think is just crazy. I'd say the same thing with Lafreniere, but Slafkovsky's even far younger than Lafreniere.
I feel like people are kind of pushing that narrative too because he was such an off-the-board draft pick, or it seemed like it was kind of a, I don't want to say last-minute decision by GM Kent Hughes to draft him, but people weren't really aware of who he was until that performance in, was it the Olympics where he was playing against
the Olympics?
Yeah, posted some really good numbers. So I feel like that's just adding to the narrative that he's a bust, that people were kind of unfamiliar with him before the draft, and now that they didn't see him immediately make an impact, they're just labeling him a bust.
Yeah, and there's some interesting storylines we can also add to this where Montreal's faith in their drafting has been typically poor. If you look back to the past 10 or so years, whenever they've picked in the top 5, they've picked 2 players, Kotkaniemi and Alex Galchenyuk. Those have been the only 2 players they've picked that high before in the last 10 to 12 years. Otherwise, they've had very good teams that have made them pick in the 20s and mid-teens and stuff. So that's a very interesting crop of players to be like, let's trust the management to pick someone that's going to be our franchise centerman, our franchise winger, our franchise defenseman, franchise goalie, etc. So I think fans were already weary going into the draft because of their history drafting such high picks. But now that he hasn't produced insane first season numbers, I think that they're a little weary as well going into year 2.
Just to add on to that, Nick, that Sergachev, they drafted Sergachev too and sent him to a trade with the Lightning.
Yeah.
In exchange for Drouin. So that just adds on to that uncertainty with the Habs management that Habs fans may have about their drafting.
So if you had to guess Slafkovsky's point total going into next season, what do you think you guys would put it at?
It really depends the role he's going to have with the team and if he can take strides with, if he's on like in the top 6. 30 to 40 points. What did he have this past year?
10
I know he
points
was
in
injured.
39 games.
Hey,
Yeah,
hey,
so
that's not good.
pretty much a 20-point pace. But I,
Yeah.
I, I agree with Noah. I think that as long as he, keeps his confidence, because I think under Martin St. Louis' system, he's going to be able to thrive. I think that Martin St. Louis employs a lot of accountability in his players, so I expect Slavkovsky to get healthy scratched at least once this year if he's not doing well. I think he'll take that as a reality check and come back stronger. This guy is growing as a person as well as a player during his young time being overseas. Not from he's not from Canada. He's moving away at a young age, but he's learning the ropes and he's going to be able to be a good piece for this future. I could say at least 30 points next year as well.
Yeah, that's pretty much in line with what I was going to say. I was going to say 40 to 45 points, I think is a pretty good mark for him. And I think if he exceeds that, then it's probably a really successful season in most people's eyes. Moving on to our third and final storyline, it's just kind of more just analysis of the performance of GM Kent Hughes. And this is a guy who was formerly an agent before he was a general manager. So that works out sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it seems to have been working out pretty well. He seems to have pretty flawless management of the cap. Pretty much every poor deal on Montreal's books was signed by Marc Bergevin, which is understandable. But just breaking it down, like he traded Jeff Petrie twice, and as a result, he essentially got a second round pick, Michael Matheson, Casey DeSmith for free, as well as getting Mike Hoffman and retaining, I think it's a quarter of Jeff Petrie's contract or something to that effect, because um, Pittsburgh took a chunk of it as well. So that's a great move. Picking up Kirby Dack was a great move, like buying low on such a highly touted player who went third overall in the draft. Alex Newhook, we'll see. Only time will tell there. And then just the Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield contrast, get them both signed for under $8 million by 8 years is a really tidy piece of business by Kent Hughes.
Yeah, those it's similar to what the Ottawa Senators have been doing with their young players. You kind of pay for the future years. So the first couple of years of those
Mm-hmm.
contracts, they may not be worth it, but just getting into the latter half, those are great value contracts that GM Ken Hughes has signed them to. And I don't really have much to say from the eye test. He's been doing a great job. I'd be happy if I was a Habs fan to have Kent Hughes as my GM.
Yeah, I agree. I think someone like Alex Newhook sort of taking it before he blossoms is a really smart move. Uh, the very worst case scenario for Alex Newhook, someone like him, is probably NHL bottom six. Um, but I don't think that's going to be the case for this player. I think he's a super talented guy. So getting him on a pretty much a bridge deal, a 4 times $2.9 million deal, I think is a really tidy piece of work, like you said, Cameron. Among his other deals, I think pieces like Newhook are going to be crucial to the future when they're looking towards things like the playoffs. Where can I take my budget players and how can I elevate them in the lineup rather than overpaying at the trade deadline?
I do think the contract for Newhook is fantastic. Like you said, a 2.9 cap hit is super reasonable. I am of the opinion they may have slightly overpaid to get him in the trade, a second and a first, because I look at the fact that immediately after that trade, Colorado went around and uh, acquired Ross Colton for a second round pick, who I think is a more proven player at this point in his career. Which, I mean, it's kind of opposites because I like the trade for Colton, but not necessarily the contract they signed him to. So, I mean, that's that's one detraction, I guess, is maybe giving up a bit too much for Alex Newhook. But then also, if we're going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, I have seen Montreal fans and NHL fans in general kind of lamenting the fact that this team had back-to-back top five picks with great players available in both of those drafts, and they ended up coming out with Uri Slavkovsky and David Reinbacher, who are both really solid prospects and both deserve to go in the area around where they were picked. But I mean, the two players that stick out in particular are Logan Cooley and Matvey Michkov as kind of dynamic, possibly franchise altering players that they passed on to pick kind of low ceiling, high floor players.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Yeah, that's for sure what fans are going to see at face value. Logan Cooley is the biggest sting for probably me and most fans because of his dynamic performances at national tournaments and everywhere you want him to prove himself, college even. He's been one of the best freshmen that you've seen in college in the past couple of years. This is really tough to see that he's not picked when you had the chance to pick him. I'm looking at Ryan Bacher's pick for a multitude of reasons, being that they picked him, but I also think that a reason why they picked him being the defenseman, because they picked Slavkovsky, a forward, the previous year, that may have played a decision in their back of their minds. You know, I think that's something that GMs don't want to say that they've decided on. It's like, oh, we got a forward, now we just need one defenseman, but that could have been a reason why Ryan Bacher was picked as opposed to a bit of a risk in Matvei Michkov, as we've spoken about in recent videos.
Yeah, great point. Moving on to our final segment here, we're just going to do a broad overview for the Montreal Canadiens season and offseason. So the offseason grade there, we're going to give them a B+. Like we said, Kent Hughes had some pretty flawless cap management this offseason, taking a chunk of Jeff Petry's contract and getting a bunch of assets in Gustav Lidstrom, a 4th-round pick, a 2nd-round pick, getting under that Mike Hoffman contract, and picking up a really movable goaltender in Casey DeSmith. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of the Alex Newhook trade. I think the contract and the concept of it is brilliant to buy low on another player, just as he did with Kirby Dach. But I think giving up a 1st and a 2nd-round pick was maybe a little pricey for me. So that might drop them down from an A- or an A to the B+ there. In terms of the offense, the actual construction of the roster, we gave them a C+ for offensive strength, a C- for defensive strength, and a C for goaltending strength. The offensive strength comes from the fact that they really don't have any superstars, but it's a pretty well-rounded group with not really one line that sticks out as being particularly weak. The defensive strength, they're relying on a lot of really young guys, so that knocks that down a bit. And their top defenseman outside of Kane Gooley, who I'm really high on, is either Savard or Matheson, and I don't think that really spells great things for the team this season at least. And then the goaltending strength, I mean, I don't think they have a standout goalie, but they do have great goaltending depth. Not many teams can boast 4 better goalies than the Montreal Canadiens can. In terms of the future outlook, this is a team that has one of the better prospect pools in the NHL, a bunch of great young players already on the roster. So we're going to give them an A- and possibly picking some players like Logan Cooley or Matvei Michkov would have upgraded this to an A or an A+.
Now moving on to our projected Eastern Conference standings, we have Montreal 9th in the wild card race. They're still a rebuilding team. They'll be in the bottom part of the league. They don't have any bona fide superstars and are quite young, so they're looking to gain some good experience, see some improvement from their young players, and they're just looking for maybe another high draft pick in the next draft.
In terms of the season-wide rankings, Nick had Montreal ranked 28th. Noel had them ranked 28th as well, and I had them ranked 29th for an aggregate placement of 28th overall, making them 5th in this series. Overall, I think it's a very exciting time to be a Montreal Canadiens fan. I think they're right on the cusp of playoff contention. It's a couple of years out here, and like Noel said, looking for another high pick. So thanks so much for watching Coast to Coast Hockey. We'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.